Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome back to our final episode of our Chapter 7, Lecture 7, and we are still looking at thinking about photosynthesis. In this presentation, we're going to look at the different ways that plants handle hot conditions. Now, what is significant about photosynthesis in hot weather? Notice I've used my abbreviation for photosynthesis, which is PS in there, so that's what that means. Why do we have to talk about this? Well, remember that we have those openings at the underneath side of a leaf. Those openings, remember, are called stomata, and the opening is going to allow for gas exchange. So this is how carbon dioxide from the atmosphere makes its way into the leaf to be used during the Calvin cycle. And this is how oxygen gas, which is produced as a waste of the light reaction, gets out of the leaf. But what we also see leaving via those stomata is water. And so this is significant, of course, because during really hot conditions, you would expect that the plant is losing more water than during cool weather. And so if you leave these stomata open, the plant risks dehydration. But then it does cause a problem for photosynthesis because you need to get that CO2 in order to fix it to a carbohydrate. And you have to get rid of that oxygen gas, which is a waste product. So here we're looking at, remember, when it's hot conditions, those stomata close, those guard cells actually close up that opening, and now somehow we have to deal with, okay, well, we've protected ourselves, or the plant has protected itself against water loss, but what about the other gas exchange that's required? There are 3 different groups of plants depending on how they handle this situation. So we call it C3, C4, or CAM plants. Let's look at C3 first, which is what we've already talked about as part of our previous study. So here, remember, is your Calvin cycle that we started by looking at, first. We mentioned that it's that Robisco enzyme that's going to fix that CO2 to the RUBP, really starting to turn that into a carbon molecule. Now that's the way that C3 plants are handling it. So that's all fine during cool weather conditions when those stomata are open, but when the stomata are closed, we run into some issues. What we see happening is that under hot conditions, plants that are in the C3 category, such as soybeans, wheat, and rice, will actually have a high amount of oxygen in the leaf or in the cells, and a low amount of carbon dioxide gas in the cells. And that Robisco enzyme kind of gets confused. And so instead of adding carbon dioxide gas, which is at such a super low level, it's going to add the oxygen gas to the RUBP. So it doesn't actually send it into the continuation of the Calvin cycle where it makes the G3P. Instead, it makes a waste product. So our cells are basically starving a little bit here during hot conditions. They don't have the carbohydrates they need in order to do the ATP production that's necessary. And so we start to see a decrease in yield in these kind of plants during hot conditions. This process of adding oxygen instead of carbon dioxide gas is called photorespiration. Okay, let's take a look next at our C4 plants. Now these have better adaptations for hot weather conditions. These would include crops like corn and sugarcane. In this case, these plants have a specialized cell that's really having the job of fixing that CO2 to a 4-carbon molecule. And so this prevents us from having this issue of this low CO2 because we're making these reserves. That 4-carbon molecule then will go to a different cell and then be used to make the G3P. So that 4-carbon molecule is going to go ahead and enter that Calvin cycle. So take a look at what this would look like. You have these 2 cells working together. The mesophyll cell in this case has that special role of fixing carbon to this sort of temporary 4-carbon molecule. That 4-carbon molecule then is used by the bundle sheath cell, converted back to carbon dioxide gas, and now we have the CO2 we need to do Calvin cycle and make G3P. So these plants, because they do that special extra step, are able to maintain a good yield even during hot conditions. Notice all of this is happening, during the day, even when those stomata might be closed. Our final type of plant to look at is called the CAM plant, CAM adaptations. These are our desert plants or our succulent plants, things like cacti. These plants are super adapted to super hot, super dry conditions. They're only opening up those stomata at night. And what we're going to see happening is during dark, when the desert is cooler and we're not the plant is not threatened by dehydration, it's going to open up those stomata. It's going to take in all that carbon dioxide gas from the atmosphere and go ahead and fix it to a 4-carbon molecule. And then it sort of acts like the C4 plants. The significance here is that it's a single cell rather than these 2 cells working together. The CO2 is entering the cell and being fixed into the 4-carbon molecule during night, and then that 4-carbon molecule is being used to release the CO2 during the day, so we can do Calvin cycle when the sun is shining. Okay, that completes us for chapter 7.